So yesterday, District Attorney Paul Howard had brought forth murder charges to Officer Garrett Rolfe with the possibility of execution. And for those of you who have not been following the story, there was a man named Rayshard Brooks who was passed out in the Wendy's drive-thru line. Employees of Wendy's called the police and said, hey, look, there's this guy that's blocking traffic. He's blocking the Wendy's drive-thru. The police came. They found Rayshard Brooks passed out in his car. And when they woke him up, they gave him a field sobriety test, which he failed. He blew 1.08, which is like 40% above the legal limit. When they went to go arrest him for a typical DUI charge, which happens 1.4 million times a year in America, a very standard thing. But Rayshard Brooks decided to fight. He decided that he was above the law, did not want to go to jail, so he fought off the officers, punched Officer Rolfe in the face, stole his taser, ran off with it, and when Officer Rolfe followed Rayshard Brooks turned around and tried to tase the officer, at which point the officer pulled out his gun and shot Rayshard Brooks. And now that officer is facing murder charges with the possibility of execution. According to Paul Howard, Rayshard Brooks never posed any threat to the officers. He was just peacefully sleeping in his car and never exhibited any aggressive behavior. Just watch.
Mr. Brooks never presented himself as a threat. At the very beginning, he was peacefully sleeping in his car, but Mr. Brooks never displayed any aggressive behavior.
However, the dash cam footage shows something very different.
Back away. Here, put your hands behind your back. Hey, stop fighting. Stop fighting. Stop fighting. Stop fighting. You're gonna get tased. You're gonna get tased. Stop. Mr. Ross. Stop. Come on, man. Stop. You're gonna get tased. Mr. Ross. Hey, hands off the taser. Hands off the taser. Stop fighting. Hands off the taser. Stop fighting.
Not aggressive and not threatening are not exactly the adjectives that come to mind when describing a scene where an officer is punched in the face and has his taser stolen. Paul Howard has already made subtle suggestions that the officer's actions were racially motivated.
One of the officers, immediately after the shooting, did not reflect any fear or danger of Mr. Brooks, but their actions really reflected other kinds of emotions.
No fear, no danger. The officers had other feelings. We can already see where this is going. This was a racially motivated hate crime and had nothing to do with Rayshard Brooks stealing the officer's taser, punching him in the face, and then trying to use his own weapon against him. Ask yourself a question. Regardless of your color, how do you think you would fare if you stole an officer's weapon and tried to use it against him? You would most likely be dead, and your death would not be considered controversial. There would be no marches in your memory and no buildings burned down in your name. This is not the first time someone tried to steal an officer's taser and use it against him. This happened last year to a man named Jeremy Scott, and the outcome was the same. He stole the officer's taser, he was shot, but no buildings were burned down in his name. Instead, the police were heralded for their good policing.
Things took a turn, though, when the sheriff says he grabbed a deputy's taser, tasing the officer and another detective.
And other deputies were engaged in the fight as well, trying to get the suspect, Jeremy Scott Jennings, to comply with the instructions of law enforcement.
But when that didn't work and Jennings refused to drop the taser, he was shot.
I think our deputies did a remarkable job under the circumstances.
Most troubling of all, Paul Howard just last week said that a taser is a deadly weapon.
At Mrs. Pilgrim, and as many of you all know, under Georgia law, a taser is considered as a deadly weapon under Georgia law. And
that's the same guy that said Rayshard Brooks was of no threat to police when he tried to attack the police officer with a taser. This statement that I just played was less than 2 weeks ago, where he deemed a taser was a lethal weapon. The corruption here is very clear. Paul Howard was very quick to suggest that the officer had racist motives in the absence of any evidence at all. This does nothing except tear our country apart, escalate racial tensions, and make people hate each other. This war on cops is not going to end well. There's already reports that Atlanta police officers are walking off on the job and that 911 calls are falling on deaf ears. In this environment, who would want to be a cop when you have two options? You could either get attacked by a criminal and let them kill you, or you can fight back and be charged with murder. When all of the cops decide to go on strike, you will be forced to defend yourself against violent criminals like Rayshard Brooks, and there will be no one to call for help.